Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hey, sorry, I realized I had to install Zoom because I
Okay.
did not have it on my work laptop. So
Right.
sorry.
No, for sure. You're fine. You're fine. I know you're at Microsoft, right? So
Yes,
maybe
I
it's
am.
not the proper
Yeah, we
software to
mostly
use.
use Teams for our
Mhm.
meetings, and I think that's the reason. Yeah,
Right, right. Yeah. Sorry about that.
no worries.
Um, yeah. Thank you for taking your time to meet with me. We were I run an AI club at my school and we were really interested in all your work, especially since it relates to Minecraft and
Hmm.
all the other game development type things, and we thought it was just really interesting and wanted to learn more. So,
Sure.
yeah, so before we get started, I was just wondering if you would be okay with me recording this. I'll try and all the questions I have are not related to anything that would be too private, I guess. They're all public stuff. So,
Sure. But do you plan to release this somewhere? Then I have to be more careful as to what
sure.
I speak, or if
Yeah,
it's just going to be shown for students. That's I mean, if you're going to transcribe it and share the findings, that's completely fine. But
right.
yeah, if it's going to be like shared as is somewhere, let me
Right.
know.
I was thinking of so typically when we do a call, we like to publish it on YouTube because it's the easiest format for a lot of people to access. But YouTube is public, so that might be, a challenge there. Like if there's anything you want me to like blur out at the end, I'll definitely do that, and I can send you a copy of the video if that's an issue.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube with public access, or would
Yeah,
it be
typically it's with public access. Typically it is with public access.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, because a lot of what we do is a bit of, mm, yeah, proprietary, as you can imagine,
right.
right?
I
So,
think all of the questions that we do have are directly from uh the papers that are already published on like archive
okay,
or stuff like this. So
okay, okay,
nothing
okay.
I I'm we just like are interested in the stuff that's already available. I mean,
Oh, okay, okay, sure, sure,
yeah,
sure.
it's
Then
not
that's
we're
fine.
not
I think then that's
yeah.
completely fine. So then, yeah,
Okay.
I'll keep in mind to not talk about maybe work that's in
Yeah.
progress or things
Yeah,
like
for
that. So
sure.
thanks for the context. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't expect you to or anything. It's just, just want to learn more about you and your work.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So can I address you by Dr. Rao?
No, just call me Sudha.
Sudha. All right, Sudha.
Sudha.
Sudha works
Yeah,
great. All right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking your time and meeting with me. Yeah, we were really just interested in your work. So maybe to get started here, could you maybe like tell me a little bit about yourself and your like journey in computer science and natural language processing?
Sure. So I did my undergrad back in India, and I was a computer science major. It's computer engineering there. So
Sure.
I did that for 4 years, and then I came here for my PhD in also computer science. And along the way, I got interested in natural language processing, which is like a subfield of artificial intelligence, AI. So I got interested in I did do a related undergrad final year project that also could have been the reason for my interest. So I worked a bit on summarization when I was in my undergrad final year, and when I came here for my PhD, I decided to focus on NLP. So that's what got me interested. And obviously at that time there was a lot of interesting work done around in that space. The whole AI field was slowly taking up with neural networks and things like that. The transformers and GPT models were still not there. This was in 2013 when I started my PhD. But I got really interested in the space, and yeah, I mean, I did my PhD thesis specifically on looking at how to ask the right clarification questions, or specifically how to teach machines to ask the right clarification questions when they are interacting with a human user,
Sure.
which was very crucial at that point because slowly people were building dialogue models, but oftentimes, or question answering models for that matter. But oftentimes, it used to be the case that you ask the machine something, it would, even if it didn't have the entire information it needs to answer the question, it would still attempt to answer the question.
Sure.
So there was a lot of thinking around how to do a bit more back and forth in which the machine just as a human does, right? If I ask a
Right.
question to someone and they don't have the right context to answer the question, then they would come back with some clarifying questions on their part. So then what I was interested in, how do you teach machines to do the same? So how do you make them ask the right clarification questions and come up? So that was my thesis focus. And um, one of the papers around it won the best paper at ACL at that time. That the notion got caught on, and then I came here at Microsoft Research in 2019, and since then I've been mostly interested in like dialogue and so on. And more recently, after the whole GPT and transformer and things like that, we've been interested, as you mentioned before, in looking at applications in games. So
Sure.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the yeah
Hmm.
context.
I think that's definitely a very, when I was doing some research on your work, I thought that was really interesting. The idea of a more conversational agent. Like if you ask, I'm not sure if ChatGPT has integrated that kind of. Do you know if ChatGPT or any of
Yeah.
these they
Mhm.
they have integrated this kind of that kind of work there where they
Yeah, I
ask
mean,
clarifying
now
questions?
with honestly with transformer based models, they are trained on a lot and lot of data, like all
Right.
of web data. So you don't have to do anything specifically to make them ask clarification questions, for example, right? So what happens is, before, when I was doing my PhD, the models that were trained on, so if you think of the size of the models and the data on which they were trained on, or were like probably 100 times smaller than what they are trained right now. So that's why you had to do all these kind of side work around, okay, it is able to converse, but how do you make it ask the right clarification questions and things like that. But now these GPT models are more like, mini humans, I would say. So they
Right.
are able
Right.
to um, take in a lot more data, and their size is much more. So the number of parameters, that's how you measure the size of model. So the number of parameters, the number of hours that they are trained on is so large that you don't have to add on any of these additional layering. You just go in and train it with a large amount of web data that includes a lot of dialogues, which does include clarification question, things like that. And these models are able to do it off the bat. So you don't have to do anything special to instill these qualities in them. They naturally do so.
Sure. I was going to say, presumably, with the increase in data, some of that new data also includes that kind of clarification thing. So
Yeah,
maybe there doesn't
exactly.
need to be some process that does that.
That's perfectly
Right.
right. Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting there. Could you maybe speak to if there was maybe like an initial moment or initial like event that really sparked your interest in natural language processing, or would you say it was more of like a general process that really took you to find your interest there?
As I said, like I did my undergrad final year project. There were a couple of us doing it on summarization. So that's when I got to understand that there is this subfield that looks at teaching machines to understand naturally spoken languages like English and others, right? So that's when I understood that something like that exists. And I don't know, languages are much more relatable to me, I feel, than say numbers or things like
Sure,
that. So
sure, for
I
sure.
feel
Right,
that's the reason that I got interested as someone who grew up in Mumbai in India. We are surrounded by a lot of different languages. So we
sure,
always
especially in
tend
India.
to, yeah, India, yes. Most
Yeah,
places in India, and especially Mumbai, because it's very metropolitan. So I was
mm-hmm.
exposed to at least, 7, 8 languages around me. So then,
Right,
even though I didn't know all of it, but I was exposed to a lot of it. So there was always this interest in understanding how to learn a new language or how to make connections between two languages. And then now thinking about how to teach machines language was all like I was drawn to it. And when I came to do my PhD. Obviously, I was not very clear that that's what I want to do. Like NLP, I was interested in theoretical computer science as well at that point, because I also equally love algorithms and things like that. So what caught me or attracted me also, like, is the applied side of it. So when I was doing my PhD there were a lot of talks, and there were talks by people who were in the industry. So for example, someone from Twitter or someone from Google used to come and give these talks at our university, and they used to talk about how these techniques are applicable in real world, like for machine translation or for search or information retrieval and things like that. So the application side of it also attracted me. So the theoretical computer science as a part of things is mostly like thinking of algorithms and things, which was interesting, but I couldn't directly see the application of it in the real world. It's much more far off, as I understood then, but these things seemed much more applied, and that's the
Sure.
other reason that attracted me to it. Yeah, so I think UMD, where I did my PhD, played a crucial role in sort of having the right environment to make this much more attractable to me.
Sure. So a mix of your undergraduate thesis, the environment at UMD, and also like just the general application of NLP in
Yeah,
comparison to other trending machine learning ideas or computer science ideas.
yeah, that's correct.
All right. So, we did want to like learn more about some of your research here. So, some of the papers that we found, especially like regarding Microsoft Emergence, that
Hmm.
idea.
Hmm.
One that was really interesting to us was the player-driven emergence in
Hmm.
LLM-driven games.
Yeah.
So we were wondering if that's a paper that you're fresh on your mind right now, if
Yeah.
that's something that you'd love to give us a simple overview of, or if there's any other paper that, anything would be great.
No, that's the paper that I would say I've been most excited about in the last year and a half. So this started off last summer, and yeah, the seed of it came from, to be very brutally honest, there were these GPT and LLMs coming up, right?
Right.
And these were able to do a lot of the things that our lab or our team was working towards.
Right.
So in research, it's a lot of like incremental work that we were doing, and we were to see a contrast, right? These GPT-3 models at that time were able to do all of the things that we were sort of separately working on, be it summarization, classification, generation, things like that. So it was fascinating to see that being done so well. And then there was this question naturally to us, like, what are we going to contribute in? Like, what is it that MSR or our team at MSR is how do you put it? Like in an advantage position as opposed to other places, right?
Right.
Um, what can we outshine others in? Because there's always the competitive advantage that we have to think about when
Yeah,
thinking
that's
about
always, yeah, if I can jump in there, that's always a question that I've had when ChatGPT came up, all the people that were working on those different like topics that ChatGPT is so good at, like what
yeah.
happened? I think that's partially what you guys were in
Yeah.
situation.
We had to like shift
Right.
drastically, like abandon a lot of things that we're working on. And I think my manager gets a lot of the credit for this. Like he didn't shy away from telling us like, okay, now we have to shift, we have to rethink our strategies. And I don't think a lot of other teams across the academia necessarily have done that. I mean, people have
Right.
slowly shifted over the years, but then my manager was very good at understanding that the landscape is going to change now and we need to think about where we stand. And that's where Xbox, the partnership that we were slowly to having with Xbox, really something that we thought that we could captivate on in substance, right? So this paper that you spoke about, so the player driven emergence, so what that does mean in a very basic way, it means that games, games, video games, especially those like RPG games, role playing games, which have
Sure.
rich narratives, the kind of narratives that and dialogues that are written for these games take years to make. And the
Right.
way they are done is like there are designers and creators who sit together, think of these dialogues, these narratives, and then once they have it, they have the players play the game. And just as give it to the players, and that's it, right? But what we thought is the players themselves in a lot could contribute to the narrative back
Sure.
to the creators, right? And in a lot of way they do that. So there are games in which people post how they play in YouTubes, and they often find very or something that the creator might not even have thought of. Like they find ways to play the game that
Sure.
is not the traditional way to play it, and that gets a lot of attention. Like there are these Discord videos that get a lot of like views, and people start playing the game that way. So in
Right.
in some sense, the players have contributed to
Sure.
that kind of emergence. And this this is like a known thing. I mean, this happens a lot more in open world games like Minecraft,
Right.
and that naturally happens where
Mhm.
it's an open world game. There is no narrative, there is no story, so the players are doing it entirely. But what we were thinking about, can this be done even with games that have set narratives? Like, can there be a mechanism in which, yes, the creators come up with the initial framework or the narrative, and then the players play the game, and then they contribute to the narrative in some sense, right? So
Like a
they
cycle
loop
kind
back.
of.
Yes, the
Right.
kind of the cyclic thing that, and I have some PowerPoint slides for this that I can share. And there is a talk coming up in IEEE conference on games on this as well, and I can share the video of that talk. And what we thought, and why now, right? I mean, if this idea could be done, it could have been done anytime in the past, but what makes this possible right now is this surge of LLMs, or the surge of generative AI models. So the
Right.
kind of cycle we envision is, of course, there are creators and there are players, but there are also these models that are in
Right.
that cycle. So what happens is, there are these creators who create a game with the LLMs being in the loop. So in our case, the game that we built had NPCs powered by LLM, so
Sure.
non-player characters
Sure.
that can
Okay.
interact with human players in a naturally open-ended dialogue. So
Right.
there has been non-player character dialogue in the past, but all of that has been pre-written. So there is like a dialogue tree that gets pre-written, and then the players traverse through that dialogue tree based on the actions they make. But we wanted to explore this notion of free open-ended dialogue with the NPCs. So what we did is, we had a game in which there were NPCs that were being powered by LLMs, and the humans could interact with them in any way that they want, with the underlying goal of stopping a bomb from exploding. That was
Sure.
the
Sure.
kind of the premise of the game. But what we were able to find in that study, and what we did is, we created a game, and we had about 30 users play this game. Then we collected the logs, and we had LLMs interpret these logs as well. So what we were able to see is that the players in some way were able to contribute to new ways of doing things in the game. So, for example, new ways of extracting information from NPCs who have some secretive information, or new ways of finding things in the game, because it was a game in which they can move around and go around
Sure.
and do
Mhm.
things. So we were able to find, even with 30 players, we were able to find like new ways in which they could contribute to the narrative. Now, obviously, what we did is, we envision that we expose all of these to the creators, and the creators will still be the ones to decide whether to incorporate these new ways of new techniques of doing things into the game or not.
Right. Right.
But they would at least get these ideas, because now this game is powered by LLM. So
Right.
that was the idea that we had. And I think the whole idea of emergence, is that, can there be this notion of, um, um, like a live game, or a living game in some sense, right, where the
Sure.
game is not stable. So it's not like the creator has created the game and then that's it, but it's a living game, a living narrative in some sense, where it keeps on evolving over time,
Sure.
with a
Sure.
lot of players playing the game. So you can imagine, a game is released in year X, and after 10 years it's an entirely modified game, because
Right.
players have taken it in that way.
Right. I know. Yeah. I know you speak about. I think one of the first applications is definitely like narratives, I think. But you know, coming from a person who's played Minecraft before, I mean, one thing that I see a lot is like Minecraft like speed run, like doing it as fast as possible, and people are always like finding like different ways of, I don't know, beating a dragon or
Mm,
doing something different. So I think that's definitely a very valid point that, you know, just by playing the game, there's a lot of insight that you can get. And especially for
mm,
narratives, it can
yeah,
definitely like reshape the whole game as time goes on. I think that's
right.
really interesting. So
Hmm.
maybe do you think you could speak to like the challenges that you tackled throughout that research there?
Yeah. I think when we were doing it last year, the biggest challenge was getting access to LLMs,
Sure.
because at that point, we were trying to get GPT-4, which was still very expensive, very less available. So we just had like 2 weeks of access, continual access. And we had to do a lot of prototyping before that with some previous LLMs and older versions of the LLMs. And then when we had access, we had to do the user study. So I mean, the credit goes to the interns who were working on it at that point, and they were able to do a lot of user studies and build the models and the game in a way that we could maximize the use of the model for that 2 weeks. So that was the biggest challenge in terms of the logistics and getting access to the models. The other challenge was getting the right users, or a large number of users for that matter, because
Right.
we honestly wanted users at the scale of 100 users, but then we were not able to get so many because there is obviously the 2 week access that we had, and we had to match it with people's
Right.
availabilities and so on and so forth. So that was the other challenge that we had. In terms of the actual gameplay experience, the other challenge was the time lag. So at that point, still these models were not, now they are very very fast, but at that point, if you post a query to get something in return, it would take a, a couple of seconds, and that kind of lag is a long lag for someone playing
Right.
a video game. I mean, you know that,
Right.
right?
For
I mean,
sure.
things have to happen instantaneously for to have the true immersive experience. So that was the
Right.
other challenge, and because of that, I felt like a lot of users didn't they had to be a lot more patient to be able to go through the entire study, which I mean, we could have benefited a lot if it were more instantaneous. So I think those were the main challenges that we faced. Yeah.
I think it might be interesting to see how if the user needing to be patient had an effect on maybe some of the responses or some of the insights that you gained from it. Because I feel like if I were to play a game and it would take a couple seconds, there's a chance I would get less interested in a conversation with that person. So I think
Yeah.
definitely there's a lot of factors that you have to consider there. It makes it a very tough challenge to achieve right there.
Right. Right.
So maybe an extension of that, where in opposite to like challenges, what would you say some of your like more significant findings were from the research?
Yeah, I think the biggest finding is that notion of how do you even think about emergence, like how do people contribute to narrative in some way. And the other significant finding was how good these models are at even interpreting these logs. So what we did is we took the game logs and then we gave it to the GPT models again with like a prompt. And in the prompt, we gave a few short examples of what kind of interpretations that we were looking for. But it was very good at combining different logs and giving higher level analysis of what sorts of trends or what sorts of innovative things that people are trying to do. And even if the two instances look very different, they are basically the same in some essence. So this notion of, as I said before, trying to extract some information from some NPC. So it was able to look at it from that higher level perspective and say that, okay, these two instances are basically the same because in both cases they are trying to extract information from the NPCs. So these LLMs are very good at that kind of analysis as well. I mean, we think of LLMs mostly in like generative way. They are good at generating, but they are also very good at analyzing. And given that these models are able to take longer and longer context now in the context window, we can actually put these logs. Then we had to summarize and have other pipeline technique to decrease the size of the context that we can insert. But now these are having like 128K token
Yeah.
kind of a limit. So that's crazy, I feel. And that way all these game logs can go in and they can do very good analysis. So that was the other significant finding. And the last important ones is looking at um, the player, the contribution that the players can make. And even if though there were just 30 players, the kind of innovativeness that they can bring to the game is amazing. And I feel a lot of it is lost. So what happens is, more in most games, you expose the game to the players and that's it. You don't take back these logs, and you can naturally,
Right.
very naturally do it. I mean, even at Xbox, they collect the logs, but only for very, very superficial things like how long are they playing the game,
Sure,
or
sure,
when do they drop out and things like that. But they don't use or analyze these logs, and maybe they couldn't do it in the past because there's a lot of human work involved in
right.
analyzing these logs. But now I feel there's an opportunity for a lot of games to do these kinds of analysis of their logs and try to understand what innovativeness the players can bring to the
Yeah,
table.
right. I think definitely Microsoft partnership with Xbox is really valuable here because you can get a lot of like genuine user feedback when you have that. You have
Yeah, and
lots of
more importantly, implicit feedback, right? So
sure.
nobody likes to give explicit feedback. All
Right.
these kind of, like, after you finish a game, who wants to fill a survey? Even if
Sure.
it is for a minute or a second, you don't want to do that. But what I
Right.
feel is these LLMs, with these LLMs, you have the opportunity to collect all these implicit feedback. Like when they are interacting with an NPC, if they stop interacting after a while, you know that that NPC doesn't have an interesting persona for that player. So how
Sure.
can you personalize the maybe the persona or the narrative for player or groups of players? Like those kinds of things are now possible. So implicit feedback that you can gain, especially from large number of players, which is very
Sure.
valuable.
Yeah, for sure. I think I do want to take maybe a step out from that specific point of research and maybe ask some more like general questions regarding your thoughts on NLP and just AI and games in general.
Mhm.
So maybe one question I'd start with is like what potential impacts do you foresee like AI driven narratives having on player engagement and maybe like replay value? Because when I keep
Mm.
coming back to this Minecraft example. I think replay value is definitely a term that, came up to me when I was thinking of some good questions. Because Minecraft can like, after, people talk about Minecraft being, 2 week stints. Like in the community right now, or some people when you talk about Minecraft, you play it for 2 weeks and then you might revisit it after a year because you're tired after the 2 weeks and it just kind of stays the same. So with the introduction of AI, how do you think that maybe changes?
Oh yeah, that's a great point, and one that is brought up very, very often in Xbox. Like the replayability of games can be really, really increased by the use of these models. Because as you said, right, if you have these NPCs, and every time you interact with them, it's going to be a different dialogue,
Right.
and obviously it has to be interesting. Otherwise, who wants to chit chat, right? But if it
For
is
sure.
to the point and to the narrative, but still engaging enough that every time it gives the player an experience of playing a different version of the game, I think there's a lot for especially for players who love to play things again and again. For some people it's always like, I play a game and that's it, I'm done playing it once and I don't want to play it again. But for people who are looking for small version changes in existing games, the replayability aspect would go really up if we use AI for like a narrative. And not just narrative, I mean, there are a lot of like sister teams in our lab who are thinking about using AI for even the world building, like the world around, like how to change it or personalize it, or make it real time, so that
Sure.
depending on what the player does, you have new worlds being created or sub worlds
Right.
being created.
Hmm.
And that would again increase the replayability, um, um, uh, replayability, like the count, or something. Because in terms of the world, it would be even more immersive if we were able to find new corners of the world that you
Right.
were never exposed to. I mean, right now, also, these games and their game worlds are so huge that you're not going to traverse all of it at once. Like, even now,
Sure.
the people, but the point is, it takes years for them to make these. And
Hmm.
after a year of playing the game, you might have touched upon all of the corners of the game. But with this AI, world building is still slower than obviously LLMs. But there's a lot of scope of that kind of immersive experiences where you build new worlds, new objects, and new actions on those objects,
Right.
just from players interacting with them.
Right. For sure. I do have a couple more questions here. I do think that, Zoom unfortunately has a 40-minute time limit. So I think if the call does cut out, would you be open to me maybe sending you a new Zoom link and we can continue for 10, 15 more minutes?
Sure, sounds good.
Sure. Okay. So All right, awesome. Can you can still hear me properly and everything?
Yes, I can.
Okay, for sure. I can hear you too. So yeah, sorry. I know the Zoom technology isn't great right now. We're trying to make the best with the free membership. So we'll
Sure,
see.
sure, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so just a couple more
By the way,
questions.
Teams is free and
Oh,
you
okay.
can record and share recording and all those things
Okay.
as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely look to
Yeah.
using Teams. I haven't used Teams before, so
Yeah.
that's definitely something I'm interested in looking at because
Mhm.
I'm not exactly a fan of the Zoom limitations all the time. So
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, so just a couple more questions here. One of the big things that I was really interested in is you're introducing so many different sources of narrative generation here. We have the players, the creators, the AI. So one of the questions I did have was, with the research and the products that you guys have made, have you seen or is there a way in which you guys are working to like maintain the narrative, I guess, coherence when sources are contributing to the story?
So, the kind of thing that we have built is twofold. So one is this player driven paper that you spoke about, where the creators are still creating the initial narrative, so they are the one doing the job of making it coherent. And then
Sure.
obviously we have prompts for the npcs, and oftentimes, they I think, as you said, they can go off the rails, but we have tried to make prompts such that you bring it back on rails whenever it goes off rails, especially when done so by the players, right? It's easy to have the NPCs be in their character if the player plays along, but if
Right.
they try to nudge it, then sometimes it can go off the rails. But we have been trying to do prompt, but there's still an ongoing challenge. You're right about that. So there's an ongoing challenge of how to make, so the npcs can make the things less coherent. But the initial framework in that paper was still written by a creator, so they knew what they
Sure.
were doing, so there was coherence and so on. And now there is the other work that we did on I don't know if you've seen the paper on Geneva, generating and
Yeah,
visualizing
I did
branching
see something
narratives.
about it. Right.
So there, the narrative, the initial narrative is actually written by the model themselves.
Mhm.
And they are pretty good at being coherent. So if you ask them to write narratives, they're good at making sure that there is an ending, a resolution, a satisfying resolution. There are no loose ends of sort, and so on. So they're good
Sure.
at that. But we still feel the richness comes from the human creators there. So what
Sure.
we
Mhm.
envision for that work is, there is always a human in the loop, where there is
Right.
an initial framework of the narrative that is generated by the LLM, but the humans come in, add their components, rework and regenerate. So it's a sort of a co-pilot for
Right.
narrative building. So I think there are challenges around coherence, but if there's a human in the loop, I think they could make sure of keeping things in the check.
Right. And
Yeah.
that actually does lead into actually a couple of the other questions that I had to ask. So maybe I'll start with one about like coherence kind of extension here. So you mentioned that there's, a strong coherence between including AI with human narratives or even just starting the whole story with AI. Um, do you think the player experience changes when they know that AI is involved? I think that might also be a question that's related to coherence because, if it's coherent enough, they might not even know that AI is involved. But do you
Mm.
think there is, maybe a change in the way that players interact with the game when they know that AI is contributing to it? And how might that affect their research?
Yeah, I think in the studies that we did, we were more or less upfront that they are going to be interacting with an AI model.
Sure.
So we didn't have a study in which they didn't know who they're interacting with. That would be interesting to do, but we haven't done that. But even in the cases where they knew that they were interacting with AI NPCs, they were able to contrast it with usual NPCs that they interact with, and obviously their experience. They were able to contrast and pinpoint
Mhm.
differences. And we did like a post study interview with them. So I think The pluses and minuses. The pluses are obviously the replayability. Like every time I interact, there is like a new thing that they are saying. But very quickly they can make it out that this is an AI. Like they would say
Sure,
that the richness is not there. The richness of the dialogue that comes from a human written dialogue is not there as yet in these
sure,
models. So they can make out so that kind of richness or dialogue tied to the overall narrative was lacking, but there was, to the plus side, there was the benefit of having a different interaction every time.
sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, and maybe you could elaborate on the question I have here is how do you envision the balance between AI assistance and human creativity in game design in the future? But I think maybe a better question would be what do you think like this maybe the general roles that each of those components would take part in? Like what roles would AI play versus what roles do humans play when we go forward with maybe an AI capable enough of having a story so rich that humans can be involved, or maybe that's not possible. Just like the general roles for the future.
Yeah, it's hard to predict because these models are getting so good so quickly. So it's
Right, right,
like if I were to think of the state of the model right now, the way that I would answer this question is the richness of the content is still lacking. Like the I would say the human creators are still much better at creating rich narratives. I don't think that the same cohort of players would play a game where the narrative was written by GPT-4 or
right,
any so there would be a different kind of cohort that could come up for wanting to play these kinds of games. But I would definitely say that human creators bring in that richness in dialogue or narrative that it's not clear that the LLMs can do. But I feel like there's a lot that can be done with the two collaborating with each
sure,
other. So there's a lot of like suggestions that these models can come up with. So if there's like like a side character in a game, the creator could say, okay, let me see what LLMs can come up with in terms of dialogues that a player could have with this side character, and maybe the things that they come up with is good enough, and they could make
right,
some small changes and say that let's do this, and this saves them a lot of time, right? And maybe they
right,
don't care so much about the side character, so they're not that invested in having the perfect dialogue or investing a day or two in writing the dialogue for
right,
that character. So that's where I think these LLMs right now can contribute, but obviously in future these models could become good at creating these rich narratives, but I would still say that humans have a role to play in envisioning the higher level storyline, because
right,
these models after all have been trained on web data and data that's already there. So it's
right,
hard for them, I would say, to come up with the higher level storyline that's very different from something that's already out there. But humans can do that. Humans can be really creative, and that's and all the web data was created by humans, so they have, I think, still the potential or the role of creating that higher level narrative, and maybe the lower level things that are tedious to do can be easily accomplished by these
right,
LLMs.
right. And this would be like a perfectly structured question here, but just generally, have you heard of like Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
and like
Mhm.
that type of thing? How I mean, I don't really have a specific question about that, but do you see the, I don't know, that playing a role or that, because that, I feel
have you
like
have
that is
you
a,
seen AI dungeons?
I have not,
Oh, you should
I'm
look
not
that
really,
at. So that's basically what I think gets at your question. So what they did is they created a dungeon master using
sure,
GPT-4, or I don't know the LLM they are using. I don't know they talk about it or not. So basically, this is an online game that you can play. And what you do is the AI is the dungeon master, will give a scenario, and you would tell what action you want to take, and then it will give you the reaction that happens. Just like, so there is no human dungeon master, but an AI dungeon
right,
master.
right,
And there's been another version of it, which is on Discord, where it's even more interesting because it can be multiplayer. So you can
right,
bring in your friends, and then the AI is the dungeon master, and you have multiple friends playing D&D
sure,
together. And it's again, like, I think someone would still argue that a human dungeon master is way better than
Sure.
an AI one. But if you're in a situation where you don't have an access to a human player to be the dungeon master, then you can probably see how AI can do this for you. So I think a lot of people have been playing with these kinds of things. So there's a lot of potential, especially like I don't know, like most D&D settings, you don't want to be the DM because you miss out on playing in that case,
Right,
right?
right,
So there are only certain types of people who like being dungeon master. So in that case, why not make the AI the dungeon master and so
right,
on? Yeah.
right. I think that's definitely an interesting idea, and I will bring it up with the Dragons and Dungeons Club at school. So that's
Yeah. AI
definitely
dungeons. You should look that
AI
up.
Dungeons, right,
Yeah, you can actually
right.
play it as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just a couple questions here to wrap it up. So do you how do you like I think one of the other aspects of having AI in games is that it could also enable some aspects of like bug detection and quality
Mm,
assurance.
yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's something you've touched on, but
Yeah.
how do you like envision the future of bug detection or quality assurance in games as AI systems, are incorporated?
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of work, and we had a recent paper. If you look at the Google Scholar on my end, you would be able to see a recent paper in ACL on automatic bug detection using LLMs. So we
Sure,
have worked on that last summer in the same game context as I was saying before, where what we did is, in addition to giving LLM these logs and asking it for these kind of emergent behavior, we also asked it for these kinds of bug detection. So it was able to do that pretty well as well, because oftentimes what happened in the studies that the players were trying to do something but it was not being done, so they were getting a little frustrated. And obviously that's a bug, right? And that's a
right,
bug that in our case occurred mainly because they were interacting with these LLMs that had handwritten prompt. So there was some issue with the prompt. So how do you understand that this is like a bug, right? So we were able to build methods in which, given game logs, the model was able to identify bugs automatically. So this is a new kind of bug detection, I would say, which is useful only for games in which there are LLM powered NPCs. But in the past, there has been work on just using machine learning for visual bug detections as well.
sure.
So
Mhm.
there's a couple of work from MSR and also Microsoft Xbox where they have tried to use these kinds of visual bug machine learning models for visual bug. So they would simulate a player and ask it to go and play around the game, and then it would use that kind of simulated player to identify visual bugs.
Sure. Yeah, I
Yeah, a
think
lot of
that's
potential in the future
right,
in bug detection. Yeah.
right. Okay, yeah. So I think that is in fact primarily all the questions that we had. Actually, one more question. So from your position, right, as a NLP researcher at Microsoft doing all your PhD, what advice do you have like for students in high school or maybe in undergrad who are interested in pursuing a career in AI and NLP, whether that be in academia or let's say in industry for now?
Yeah, I think for high schoolers and even early undergrad students, my suggestion would be to create projects
Sure.
with your fellow friends in your cohort who are interested in these kinds of things. I think because there are so many tools that are accessible right now. That wasn't the case when we were doing our high school or undergrad, right? I think having these small projects gives you an experience of using these things and lets you understand whether you are interested, and then at the end you have something to show for when you're building your portfolio later, right? So I think as a high school student and as a early undergrad, that's my suggestion. But if you're in your later years of your undergrad, your final year and so on, I would think about thinking about research papers. So a lot of conferences have workshops. I think I agree that it's harder to get a paper in a main conference track, right? It's challenging always. There are so
Right.
many submissions, but there are a lot of student workshops, there are workshops. So try to find workshops in first, try to understand what are the top conferences in the field of your interest. If it's NLP, ACL, NACL, and iClear, ICM, and all these new rips, all these, like try to find from someone, it's easy to do that, like all these top conferences that are there in the field, then try to look for workshops. and try to see if you can get a funding to go to this workshop, and then try to see if you can submit a paper, like a 4-page paper. A lot of places have an abstract, and it used to be the case that is only PhD students submitting, but that's not the case right now. There are undergrads submitting to these places as well. So definitely would encourage to do that, because that really helps you get into, if you want, like a PhD program, if that's your path. But if your path is industry directly, then doing a lot of projects, internships with companies that you think is at the forefront of this area that you are interested in, doing internships during your undergrad. That's like a great way for both the company to understand how good you are, and for you to understand if the company is a good fit. So later on, when you go for your job interviews, you are able to, gauge where you
Right.
stand, and so on. So yeah, getting a lot of these real hands-on experiences, I think would be very, very crucial in putting you out there in this competitive time, right? It's very
Right.
competitive.
Right.
There's a lot of people trying to apply and much lesser positions. So trying to build up your portfolio
Right.
from early on would
Hmm.
be very, very useful.
For sure. Well, I really appreciate all the advice. If you had no more questions for us, that's really about it here. We really appreciate your time. I think.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You said that you are in some AI, what was it? Like a
Oh, right. So I personally run an AI club at my school, at my high school.
Mm,
So,
that's
you
cool.
know, yeah,
That's
we
cool.
like
So
to
what do you all do there? Do you do projects or read things?
um So it's kind of a mix. So, um, maybe I'll go from the angle of what we do. So every week, I select out a couple papers that I think are really interesting. Your
Wow.
paper was one of the papers that I selected, so I thought that it
Mhm,
was interesting. It would be interesting to see if I can contact you, and I appreciate you for
mhm,
joining.
mhm, mhm,
But yeah, so I usually gather a couple and we just discuss some of the concepts. That's usually a weekly thing. And then in terms of projects, I don't know about, other members of the club, but I personally, like at our school, we have some robotics organizations, so
mm,
some people do that. I personally am currently a high school like intern at Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire.
mm,
So I work
mhm.
at a robotics lab there, and we work on like
Cool.
publishing stuff. So
Mhm,
that's I guess a project aspect, and sometimes we also have like some fun collaborative projects, I
mhm,
guess, in the lab
mhm,
in the
mhm.
club. But yeah, so we just are interested in AI in general, and we just try to stay on top of things and in front and learn.
That's amazing. I think a lot more high schools should do that. Probably every high school has an AI club that
Right.
I'm just less aware about it for
Hmm.
sure. But that's great to hear, and I would definitely encourage you to, or your club to keep doing it. I
Hmm.
think these things really put you in the forefront as opposed to
Right.
others when you're thinking of a competitive space. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I think maybe I'll throw something out there. If there's ever any like, if you ever need assistance in like testing a model, testing a
Mhm.
Minecraft thing, I don't know how that works,
Mhm.
but we'd
Yeah.
love to help out if that's if you ever have an issue with participation, that's
Yeah.
something we
That's
definitely
actually
let you
great
know.
to know, because we are always looking for users to test our things. The only caveat here is obviously you are not an employee, so we'll have to,
Sure.
but that's possible. Like we always
Mhm.
crowdsource things. So I will keep your contact in mind,
Sure.
and definitely would be so, but these would be below 18 though, right? That might be.
Some people are below 18. I'm turning 18 soon. So I think the
Okay.
seniors, at least I know,
I
are
see. Would
primarily
be.
above 18.
Okay,
So
that's good. That's the only, so we, as you can think of, since a lot of work we are doing is interacting with LLMs, you don't
sure.
want to technically to be exposed to underage kids.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
but I think, yeah, but that's good to know. So I will definitely keep your contact on file
Yeah.
for
No, I
any
thought I'd
future.
just put that
Yeah,
out there because,
yeah,
I think a lot of your research is really fascinating. So I think
yeah.
that's
Great
amazing
to know
stuff.
that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Thanks a lot,
Well,
Mihir. Nice talking to
yeah, of
you.
course. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful
Yeah.
day.
You too. Take care.
Bye bye.